not a specific industry. It is a category of different industries. Digital health on the consumer side involves some of these direct-to-consumer telehealth plays, but it can also involve ways in which existing health systems can engage with their patients. Like I said, Zoom was a great example of how physicians raced to figure out how to engage with patients. Like patient engagement is going to be a big part of what digital health is in the future. How doctors communicate with their patients synchronously and asynchronously, how doctors are communicating with other health systems and other folks that are in the patient's orbit. So I think digital health is something that you will see evolve rapidly across all aspects of what has traditionally been, in under the healthcare innovation umbrella. On the biopharma side, we're seeing just unprecedented levels of innovation spurred by, when people are motivated, when institutions are motivated, things happen very quickly. And we're seeing that across the board. The Moderna and Pfizer vaccines came to market orders of magnitude more quickly than you've ever seen any therapeutic come to market in the past, especially at this magnitude. Systems are adopting new IT systems like Well Health, like I mentioned before in One Up Health, than you've ever seen in the past. Traditionally, there's always been a delineation from a health system that has looked at what is necessary to have and what's nice to have. And on the north side of must have has been the traditional electronic health record and very little else, like maybe some scheduling systems and some appointment reminder systems. But even those were kind of on the more nice to have systems. They were focused on kind of increasing ROI. And underneath in the nice to have, you had everything else. And it's just a graveyard of companies that have been founded over the last 20 years that have come up with what I think are fairly compelling value propositions, but just structurally had a hard time penetrating the industry. That's now changing. The barrier between must have and nice to have is expanding such that more companies are now falling into the bucket of must have, and so health systems are more willing to engage with and adopt solutions from startups. Zoom really, I hate to rely on the obvious answer, but all of the technologies around both synchronous and asynchronous communication has truly been transformational with how patients have been engaged. Lots of health systems, especially at the beginning of COVID lockdowns, have primarily been focused around, how you leverage technologies like Zoom and external technologies like teledoc involving other networks to expand your reach to hit your customers, hit your patients where they are. That's a very different way of operating than the way they had before. And physicians and health systems had largely been resistant to those kinds of technologies. I think one thing that's operating in favor of that trend is just how reimbursements are occurring. So traditionally, healthcare has largely been a fee-for-service industry. And hospital systems and doctors' offices have been motivated, at least in part, if not entirely, by the bottom line, by profits. And traditionally, you could bill much more for in-person visits than you could for virtual visits and phone consultations. That has changed quite a bit in a couple of different dimensions. One is that some institutions have transitioned to more of a, especially in the Medicare world, capitated payments and bundled payments, where the incentives have changed, where there is basically a fixed payment for a bundle of services and a condition. It is now in your best interest to do whatever possible to minimize the amount of services and maximize the outcome. And still in the fee-for-service world, you're starting to see payers and even CMS allow more billing for better billing, more lucrative codes for health systems to engage patients where they are. Remote patient monitoring, chronic care management, all of that happening remotely is now, it's not nearly as lucrative as an in-house procedure or an in-house visit, but it's far closer to parity than it used to be. Has the potential to, second order effect, improve patient outcomes, because you can now do so much more training for example, with surgeons. a company like Oso VR can fundamentally change how medical device companies train their physicians in how to use their devices, where previously it was all on the job training, right? If I've never installed a stent before, I don't know how to do it. And I actually literally have a representative from the biotech company sitting next to me telling me how to, I, as the surgeon, who's supposed to be the subject matter expert, they're telling me how to install the stent or any medical device, really. The reality is with VR, you can now bring that all online and make it a zero risk procedure. It's not about getting the exact movements right. It's more about just understanding the steps to make something happen, to accomplish the goal that you're trying to accomplish. On the AI side, very different technology than AR or VR, but still just tremendous applications for it. Uh, Anywhere where you're relying on a pair of eyes and a brain to make gut calls on something, or to, even if it's not a gut call, where you have limited human resources to evaluate complex situations, AI can be a force multiplier on the resources, the human resources available. But I do think that telehealth is, as a trend, is here to stay and will only continue to grow over time. I think what telehealth needs isn't, it doesn't need to go back to a world where it barely supplants the visit to the health system. I feel like telehealth will ultimately become the major touch point. It'll be the central hub, like rather than your primary care physician. We're even seeing HMOs that are far more effective when you have a primary care provider that can perform a remote visit before referring you to the appropriate specialist. Uh, I feel like there will be a trend where telehealth will be the hub of the main touch point that one will have with their healthcare journey. And that one touch point will inform wherever else the patient needs to go next, whether that is, I need to go see an orthopedist who can actually evaluate what they think is a broken ankle, whether it's a, visit to an imaging center to get a CT scan or an MRI. But what I've done there is I've decreased the number of in-person touch points. And so you're effectively taking a doctor and making them much, much more efficient. I think all of this is in the name of increasing quality of healthcare for an individual and increasing efficiency of the physician. Where I think there is a massive gaping hole in today's technology is filling the in-home care gap. And I don't mean in-home care for aging in place or, infusions at home. I really do think that there's a number of services and procedures that it doesn't really matter where they happen. I can go get a blood draw at my doctor's office, at a hospital, at LabCorp, at Quest. It doesn't really matter. You just care about having a phlebotomist who knows what they're doing. Uh, you can actually bring a lot of that in home. If I visit my primary care physician through Zoom or through Teledoc, I can fundamentally then have them, as a next step, order labs, take vitals, with a wireless blood pressure cuff, um, have somebody come in and do physical therapy. A lot of that can be done inside my home without me having to go anywhere. So I think there's a pretty big gap in the in-home portion of what the future of medicine looks like. And we'll start to see more startups that are addressing that gap.